Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "It is an element in a part of every modern award that it is the intention that any changes to awards will not reduce the take-home pay of employees." But last week's penalty rates decision, which the Prime Minister supports, will reduce take-home pay. The Prime Minister has the power to fix this problem. Why won't he? And when will the Prime Minister join with Labor to change the law so the take-home pay of all workers is not cut?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the honourable member for his question, underlining yet again his extraordinary hypocrisy on the matter of penalty rates. Not only an Olympic champion in issuing 457 visas, he's a double gold medalist. He's a gold medalist in cutting penalty rates. Again and again, it's quite a pile. All of these EBAs, all with his signature, all casting away penalty rates, some of them in return for payments to the union. So it's not as though he gave away the penalty rates for nothing. The union got a payment out of it. Yes, $25,000 a year, I think it was, in clean event. That was, and of course, a minor detail, Mr. Speaker, that he didn't share with the workers he was representing. No, Mr. Speaker, no, he didn't do that. Kept them in the dark. That's what he did. Kept them in the dark while the union took the money. Now, Mr. Speaker, the reference that I was making earlier today was to the decision of the Fair Work Commission, paragraph 2016, for those who care to read it, where they state that the vast majority of modern awards include a clause in these terms that neither the making of the award nor the operation of transitional agreements is intended to result in a reduction of the take-home pay of employees. That's in their decision. That's in the decision of the independent umpire. And then they set out, as Jenny George reminded us earlier in the week, as we noted on Monday, then they go through the various ways in which they are considering transitional arrangements to ensure that workers' take-home pay is not reduced overall as the penalty rate changes come into effect. That's entirely consistent with the law. It's consistent with their practice. They've called for submissions. They are an expert, independent tribunal, which the Labor Party manned. Every single person on that panel was appointed by the Labor Party. The reference to look at penalty rates was given to them by the Leader of the Opposition. Again and again, he promised to respect and support and endorse the decision of the independent tribunal. He accused us of not supporting the independent tribunal, but now, of course, it's him. One backflip after another. Mr. Speaker, the Olympic champion of 457 visas and cutting penalty rates has no credibility, no integrity, no consistency on this or any other matter.
The honourable member for Groom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the importance of economic growth for jobs and investment? What threats are there to the Australian economy, including in my electorate of Groom?
Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. And I recall my visit to Toowoomba when we looked at the developments there, including the new airport, and the optimism that is felt there for the big export opportunities that we have opened up. The new Wellcamp Airport is one that will be taking the finest produce of the Darling Downs to the dining tables, the restaurants, the homes of Asia, and will be able to do that because of those big export deals that the Labor Party opposed, but we supported, we carried through and delivered. And we're seeing that again and again. We saw on the weekend a cut in the Indonesian tariff on Australian sugar, making Australian sugar competitive with sugar from Thailand and the rest of ASEAN, a big increase in the availability of Australian beef cattle, live exports to Indonesia. Every day we are working hard to create more opportunities for Australians to export, for the Australian economy to grow and for businesses to create jobs. And we're having real success, thanks to the hard work and enterprise of millions of Australians, including those in the honourable member's electorate. We've seen strong economic growth in the last quarter. Our economy is now growing faster than any of the world's biggest economies, any of the G7. Now, that is despite economic headwinds, the downturn inevitable in the mining construction boom. Nonetheless, the resilience of the Australian economy, supported by pro-business policies and opportunities created by the government, is enabling us to forge ahead. Now, Mr Speaker, we know that there are, however, many Australians in some parts of Australia that are doing it tough, and they need support too. And one thing they need more than anything is affordable and reliable energy. Those parts of Australia, and I'm thinking particularly of South Australia, which have seen a decline in their manufacturing base and are seeking to reindustrialise, to draw in and retain manufacturing industry, they need affordable and reliable energy. And what they have from the Labor Party is the promise of a 50% renewable target with no plan to implement it, no idea of how it can be paid for, $48 billion of cost. Look at South Australia with a 40% renewables already. They can't keep the lights on, and when they're on they can't afford to pay for them. That's Labor's vision. At every element of their policy, higher taxes, unaffordable energy, unreliable energy, an anti-business agenda we haven't seen for a generation. That's the modern Labor Party.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. We all know what the Prime Minister meant when he said he supports the decision. What government policy was the Prime Minister referring to this morning when he said, and I quote, "Well, there's no question for you if you well, the evidence seems to be very strong that if you have lower penalty rates, lower rates on a Sunday or a public holiday, then there is less, then there is more incentive. If you like, it's more affordable for businesses to employ people. That's common sense, but that's one consideration." Prime Minister, don't Australian workers deserve better than that?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, the Manager of Opposition Business was reading pretty quickly. I think I got most of the question, but the Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his comic interlude and recall on the subject of penalty rates his time as an organiser for the SDA, for the shop distributor to an allied trades union. And, Mr Speaker, in those times, the SDA
Members on both
negotiated
sides.
one trade away of penalty rates after another, one after another, to the point that a shop assistant working in an independent small business, clothing shop, a dress shop, menswear shop, on a Sunday is being paid substantially more than a shop assistant in Target. So how does small business compete? There's a
Member for Wakefield's warned.
The honourable member's got the answer.
Warned.
The honourable member's got the answer. What small business should do is knuckle down to the union. That's what they want.
Prime Minister. Prime Minister can resume his seat. The member for Wakefield's just showing his guilty conscience. I warned him. You don't need to walk. It's not a cricket match. Prime Minister has the call. Members on both sides. I suspect you should remain packed up, though. Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, in cricket, I think when the batsman starts his walk, he can't change his mind and come back to the crease. We should have kept going. But, Mr Speaker, the truth is, and the member for Watson knows this as well as the Leader of the Opposition and so many of the former union officials opposite, they know that their unions have traded away penalty rates again and again. Now, the Leader of the Opposition, of course, is distinguished for trading them away in return for undisclosed cash payments to the union. That That was the subject of condemnation in the Royal Commission report, but right across the board, penalty rates have been compromised by those opposite. What they used to say, only for about 120 years, what the Labor Party used to say, from its foundation in fact, was that the independent umpire in matters of this, fixing wages, fixing penalty rates, should be respected. The Leader of the Opposition said that again and again until January, when he did a complete backflip. Now, we respect the independent umpire. They've done a very thorough job. They're now looking at the transition of the changes. They've considered all the evidence, hundreds of witnesses, thousands of pages of evidence. That's their job. They've done a good and thorough job. And honourable members opposite, as Jenny George said, should be careful what they wish for. If they want to walk away from supporting the independent umpire and picking up the industrial policy of the Greens, well, I suppose I'd say to the member for Melbourne, if plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery, the honourable member for Melbourne should be sincerely flattered, because the Labor Party have picked up his climate policy, they picked up his border protection policy, and now they've picked up his industrial policy.
It's the member for Sydney. I've asked her to stop interjecting. I think we're about to replay the previous sitting week, the way we're going. It's Thursday again. Member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on yesterday's strong national accounts? Will the Treasurer outline how a strong economy supports a balanced budget and gives hard-working Australians the confidence to get ahead?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Banks for his question, and I commend him on the great work he's doing as the chair of the House Committee on Economics, in particular in relation to taking up the issues in relation to the banking system, and I commend those committee members for the work they're doing in that area. Yesterday's national accounts represented a vote of confidence by Australians in their own economy, working together with the government to ensure that we are doing our part to drive growth in our economy. Australia's economy is once again growing faster than every G7 country today, and business investment and consumer spending has improved. New business investment was up for the first time in 12 quarters, and household consumption, the contribution to growth, more than doubled in the December quarter. So I find it puzzling that the Leader of the Opposition has just been saying the last day or so that Australians have been closing their wallets. Well, the December quarter figures showed that they had more than doubled their contribution. The confidence of the Australian consumer in the Australian economy was demonstrated. Now, in addition to that, both volumes and prices of our exports were increased in the December quarter, and we've seen an improvement in income, and we've seen an improvement in the terms of trade over the last 3 quarters. And what that has meant is our current account deficit is at the lowest point, the narrowest point since 1980, Mr Speaker, and that's supported by those high export volumes and prices. But, Mr Speaker, the resultant improvement in our terms of trade from commodity prices is very welcome, but you cannot build your budget on the vagaries of commodity prices. You cannot do that. Improvements in commodity prices does not give a leave pass to increase spending or step back from the job of budget repair. That is the very firm view of this government. Our fiscal strategy, which is published in the budget, is to reduce the deficit and to reduce debt on every opportunity if there is any improvement in commodity prices or the improvement in the parameters that would lead to that result. And that is the very strong view of this government. You don't chase the commodity prices up the hill or down the valley, Mr Speaker. What you do is you focus on the structural integrity of your budget, and that's why under this government we have reduced the growth in spending from over 3.5% when the Labor Party was running the books to less than 2%, Mr Speaker, and we have reduced the growth in debt from 34%, which is what it was growing at, the annual growth in debt, 34% when the Labor Party was running the books, and we've reduced that by 2/3. Now, we must continue to ensure we do the job of budget repair by getting expenditure under control. Bills have already been through this House, voted against by the Labor Party, who refused to try and support the government to get expenditure under control. They have a simple message for the taxpayers of Australia. They want taxpayers, 8 out of 10 income taxpayers, going to work every day to pay for that welfare bill. They want them to pay more.
Has concluded. The member for Lyons will cease interjecting. The member for Barton has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Terry works in a newsagent in my electorate. Terry says he works on Sundays and sacrifices time with his family and friends at important events like birthdays to provide for his partner and a 4.5-year-old son. Terry stands to lose almost $4,000 a year because of the Prime Minister's support for cutting penalty rates. He says the cut to penalty rates will just mean the same work for less money. Why won't the Prime Minister use his power to stop Terry's pay cut?
The Prime Minister has the call. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question.
The member for
And I
Lawler.
answer the question in the words of her leader. Independent umpire is fundamental to the industrial relations system in Australia. That's said by her leader. He said, I think it is an anathema to the best interests of working people to start handing to a politicised parliament control of wage rates in this country. You know, said her leader, the honourable member's leader, I see some on the Greens and the far left say, well, that's a simple answer, don't
Lindsay.
have an independent umpire. My concern is that would be loading a gun for a future Conservative government to pull the trigger and attack penalty rates. We are a Conservative government, a Liberal national government. We are supporting the independent umpire, which the honourable member's party established, referred the issue to, appointed the members of, and stood beside and stood up for until political cynicism, populism overtook them and they abandoned the principle that the Labor movement had adopted for 120 years.
Just before I call the honourable member for Mayo, I'd like to inform the House we have present in the gallery this afternoon the Honourable Rob Borbidge, the former Premier of Queensland. On behalf of the House, we extend a very warm welcome. And I'd also like to welcome to the gallery this afternoon Mrs Heather Henderson, the daughter of Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister, Sir Robert Menzies. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. It was revealed in Senate estimates yesterday that 75% of the contents of ration packs for Aussie diggers are foreign-produced, including items such as plain biscuits, fruitcake, tea, coffee and tomato sauce. Even the toilet paper is from China. Does the Prime Minister agree that Australian troops serving our country should be supplied with Australian goods in their ration packs, which would also support Aussie food manufacturing? And if so, how will the government rectify this situation?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for a question. Mr Speaker, the revised Commonwealth procurement rules came into effect on the 1st of March, this year, and the Senator Xenophon, in fact, advocated for the changes. The Commonwealth is now required to assess the economic benefit to the Australian economy of each procurement. I'm advised the vast majority of items in ADF ration packs are Australian and New Zealand products. I'm advised the Department of Defence always looks to maximise Australian content, in stark contrast to the negligence of the Labor government during its 6 years, when leaving aside the very important issue of the ADF ration packs. I'd remind the honourable member, who of course represents an electorate in the state of South Australia, that during 6 years of Labor government, not one Australian naval vessel was commissioned from one Australian yard. Not one. Not one. The naval shipbuilding requirements of our nation, the defence of our nation, was set to one side in the sea of complacency and neglect that so characterised the government of which so many members opposite were part.
Leader of the House.
The Department of Defence awards these contracts for the ration packs. to the winning tenderer based on quality and value for money to meet the ADF's high standards. I understand that this particular tender closed before the new procurement guidelines came into effect yesterday on the 1st of March.
The member for McKellar.
My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how increased investment will lead to increased earnings and opportunities for businesses and hard-working Australians in McKellar and elsewhere? Will he also outline for the House how alternative approaches to the government's plan risk to increase investment? The Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for McKellar for his question. As a former small business owner himself, he will know and welcome the national accounts results that we saw yesterday, Mr Speaker. The national accounts, if you look at them over a period of time, shows that since the end of the mining investment boom, wages and company profits have been in very tough territory. And prior to yesterday's results, which were heavily influenced by the improved mining profits from the spike in commodity prices towards the end of last year, there has been a real challenge in the area of profits and wages now, Mr Speaker, over the last 5 years. In fact, in the 3 years prior to the December quarter's result, on average, company profits had been falling by 0.2% every quarter. For 12 successive quarters, private new investment had also been in decline. Now, is it any wonder in those circumstances, Mr Speaker, that when you've got businesses under such strain and under such pressure, that wage growth has also been subdued? Now, during the same period of time, over the same period of time, the growth in the compensation of employees in the national accounts was very modest, but it was positive, Mr Speaker. It was positive and growing at 0.7% per quarter. Now, the government understands that small and medium-sized businesses have been carrying an enormous burden in our economy. They have been putting their hands in their own pockets for years now in a tough environment to ensure that their employees stay in work and are able to have even the modest increases in wages that have been achieved. And, Mr Speaker, as they put their hands in their pockets, they have looked to this government to do what we did in the budget and to say to them, we are going to take the tax monkey off your back. So you are in a position to be able to support, Mr Speaker, to support them in their ambitions for their businesses, to grow their businesses and to support higher wages, Mr Speaker, for their employees. You cannot give employees higher wages, Mr Speaker, if your business is going backwards. You cannot get a job in a business that is closed, Mr Speaker. And the recipe of those opposite, the recipe of the Labor Party. Yesterday, Mr Speaker, it was amazing that the Shadow Treasurer, for the first time in a long time, didn't bother to mention the national accounts, put a statement out on it, Mr Speaker, and he sneered at the idea that companies might make profits in this country, Mr Speaker. That's the nature of the modern Labor Party, to attack those who put their own hands in their own pockets to run businesses, Mr Speaker, small and medium-sized businesses, to ensure that they can provide the wages and the jobs that Australians who work hard rely on, Mr Speaker. Those opposite oppose the policies that are going to support those businesses to put more people in jobs, to support those businesses to invest and to grow, Mr Speaker. Instead, we have — it's not a modern Labor Party, Mr Speaker, it's a dinosaur Labor Party, Mr Speaker, who are wedded to that old ideology of attack the businesses, Mr Speaker, in the absolute joke of an idea that they think that will help workers.
Has concluded. Leader of the House and the Treasurer will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
Thank you. My question's to the Prime Minister. Margarita is a single mother with 2 children who regularly works Sundays at a hotel. The Sunday penalty rates help Margarita put food on the table, buy shoes for her kids. She stands to lose thousands in take-home pay. She says, and I quote, "Everything is getting more difficult. The bills go up, so why is our wage going down? Where's the balance?" Can the Prime Minister explain why he's willing to intervene in the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, the CFA decision, but will do nothing to stop Margarita's pay cut?
Leader of the House and the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection are delaying the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, the lady that the honourable members refers to, Margarita, may be affected in the manner he describes by the penalty rate change.
Well,
we've learnt We've learnt not to take uncritically assertions of fact from the opposition. But of course, Mr. Speaker, the fact is that the Leader of the Opposition again and again and again stated that he would support the decision of this Fair Work Commission. He gave them the reference to look at penalty rates. When he did that, Mr. Speaker, do we think that the Leader of the Opposition imagined the Fair Work Commission was going to increase Sunday penalty rates? Was that his plan? No. No, the honourable member for Wakefield says no. So he obviously must have felt they would stay exactly the same. So what's the point of asking for a review if penalty rates are going to be unchanged? And then, just before the 2013 election, the same Leader of the Opposition, then the Minister for Workplace Relations, promised to give $300,000 to COSBOA, the small business peak body, to argue their case in the Fair Work Commission. Did he imagine they were going to go in there and say, our members want to pay higher penalty rates? I don't think so. Did he think they were going to bother to go there and say they should be unchanged? He knew what COSBOA was going to say, and he was going to pay them to say it. The hypocrisy of this Leader of the Opposition strains the boundaries of traditional political practice. He has moved into the post-truth environment with a vengeance.
Member for Ballarat's interjecting while I'm warning her. The member for Lawler is also warned. She's been interjecting continuously for the last couple of days, but particularly loudly today. And I remind the member for Bendigo that she has already been warned and she won't be warned again, and I call the member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister advise the House on actions taken by the government to help hard-working Australian businesses capitalise on new export opportunities? How will this benefit our state of Western Australia?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Moore for his question and note his deep concerns about the importance of the resources sector for the Australian economy. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the national accounts showed, as the Treasurer has indicated, that fuel exports, driven in large part by new LNG plants in Australia, rose by almost 25%. Liquefied natural gas will play an increasingly important role in Asia's energy needs. In fact, the International Energy Agency has assessed that by 2030, LNG demand will almost double. Now, Australia is already the world's second largest exporter of LNG, and over the next 3 or 4 years, due to large resource projects in Western Australia, we will become the largest exporter of LNG in the world, overtaking Qatar. Mr. Speaker, about 2 weeks ago I was able to visit Gochi in South Korea for the naming ceremony of the Impex Corporation largest semi-submersible vehicle in the world, the Ichthys Project LNG platform, which will be towed down to the Browse Basin, about 200 kilometres off the northwest shelf of Western Australia. Mr. Speaker, during the construction phase of the Ichthys project, there were about 10,000 Australian jobs, and many of them were in Western Australia. And now, during the operation phase, there will be many jobs, and it's estimated that the Ichthys project will produce about 9 million tonnes of LNG a year, and 70% of that is already on-sold in long-term contracts to Japan. So this demonstrates the importance of LNG exports to our export income and therefore the strength of the Australian economy and the Western Australian economy. And, Mr. Speaker, it's quite apparent to those who have an understanding of the resources sector that investment confidence must be maintained. And I congratulate Premier Colin Barnett for his leadership and vision in relation to large-scale resource projects. But the member for Moore will be interested to know that the Western Australian Labor Party is dashing investor confidence first by admitting they had a 50% renewable energy target and then denying that they would bring it in after the election. And now we find that the Western Australian Labor Party is refusing to release its costings in advance of the election. How can investors have any confidence, let alone Western Australian voters, in yet another dishonest, deceptive Labor Party that should not ever be in government in Western Australia?
The member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Linda lives in my electorate in Katoomba. Linda says she works on Sundays as a hotel chef because her rent is more than half her wages and she needs the money. Linda previously relied on Centrelink but reskilled to become a chef, and she's proud she got off Centrelink and into a job. Linda can't understand why the Turnbull government wants to cut her wages. Why, when the Prime Minister has the power to act, is he refusing to stop Linda's pay cut?
Yeah. The Prime Minister has the call.
Yeah. Well, I thank the honourable member for her question and for her description of her constituent Linda from Katoomba, who's retrained as a chef, and that's a great success on Linda's behalf. But, Mr. Speaker, I trust the honourable member will be advising her constituent that the decision about penalty rates is not a decision of the government. What the honourable member said in her question is quite misleading. It's a decision of the Fair Work Commission, a independent tribunal established by the honourable member's party, supported by the honourable member's party, endorsed by her leader,
Treasurer,
who lacks both the courage or the courtesy to do anything other than turn his back in this House. He can't take it. He's back again. That's good. That's good. A bit of common courtesy goes a long way. And Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is it's a decision of an independent tribunal. There are transitional considerations being undertaken, as the Fair Work Commission has described, and they will seek to ensure that all workers covered by these changes will not have a reduction in take-home pay overall, as set out in the report from the paragraph I quoted earlier.
The member for Parramatta and the member for Moreton are once again caution, and if the volume doesn't lower, I'll be lowering it very shortly. The member for Page.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline to the House how the Australian agricultural sector is driving growth in the economy, and what does this growth mean for horticulture, particularly expanding businesses like—
Member for Page can resume his seat. The member for Chifley is a regular interjector. You're going to be doing whatever you're doing back in your office in a second. I'm going to ask the member for Page to repeat his question, and I think I've made it pretty clear. There's a number of people that have been warned. There's also a number of regular customers, and one of them's pointing now. Yep, the member for Moreton. I'll have no hesitation. Well, you can just leave now. I'm addressing the House. It'll make it much quicker. Just leave now under 94A. The member for Page can begin his question again. The member for Page will. The member for Moreton will leave immediately. The member for Page can begin his question again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline to the House how the Australian agricultural sector is driving growth in the economy? What does this mean for the horticulture sector, particularly expanding businesses like Mountain Blue Farms in my electorate of Page? And is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any threats to the sector and the thousands of hard-working regional Australians it employs?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Well,
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question and note that his electorate, the blueberry sector, has a record harvest of 11,000 tonnes of $218 million in the blueberry sector of our economy. And of course it's a part of what has been an incredible result for Australia. And we have a 1.1% GDP for the last quarter, and no sector has contributed more than agriculture. No sector has contributed more than agriculture. So as we've been working hard on this side of the House, so we now have record beef prices, record meat sheep prices. In fact, even our wool prices now are back to levels that have never been higher since about 87, 88. We're turnaround in contracts for wine, new markets. All these things are now contributing and assisting the 322,000 plus people who are directly employed by agriculture. And you can see it in a seminal way in that a B double that you take into Roma, which is in Queensland. At the start, when the Labor Party was in, you get about $60,000 for it. Now you get about $90,000+ for it. An absolute increase in people's standard of living. And this has been supported by 3 free trade agreements, 90 live animal destinations, 100% write-off for watering, 100% write-off for fencing, write-off over 3 years for grain storage, and you can see that in the member for Parks electorate. The dog fences that we're rolling out so you get sheep back into areas, the $2.5 billion water policy. And you always wonder, well, does a difference in government make a difference? Well, I looked at the last 12 months of Labor. In the last 12 months of Labor, see, we've gone up by 23.7%. In the last 12 months with the Labor government, the growth was minus 0.5. So that's the difference, minus 0.5. They were minus 0.5. We are positive 23.7, an absolute record. And so I thought I'd try and find out about the Labor Party's policy. So I found this seminal tone. Bill Shorten, if you want to understand the next Prime Minister of Australia, this is essential reading. So I decided to read it. And he had 3 pages of agriculture. A hotter, drier climate combined with more frequent extreme weather events is also making life difficult for Australians in some of our oldest industries, notably agriculture. All of these changes force us to assess Australian industries and what place we'll have in our future. He even doubts its future, and he goes on. If you weren't depressed by then, he goes on to talk about higher temperatures will produce more crop-damaging pests. 3/4 of the land currently used for viticulture will be unsuitable. And on it goes. Do you feel like topping yourself? This is exactly the
Deputy
sort of
Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister will withdraw that remark.
The reality, of course, in agriculture is this. This is exactly what's happening, mate. This is exactly where it's going. And we have turned around Australia's agricultural output because we are the better government.
The member for Bass.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Ruby lives in my electorate and works 2 casual jobs while studying part-time at university. She says she works in retail on Sundays because it makes a huge difference to her low income. Ruby says this pay cut would be devastating and the owner of the business will just keep the money taken from her pay. Why won't the Prime Minister stand up for the penalty rates of workers like Ruby and use his power to stop the pay cut?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. The fundamental issue for the Labor Party here is, do they support the independent umpire in industrial relations? That is the fundamental question. It was a question that needn't have been posed at all a few months ago, until the Leader of the Opposition abandoned 120 years' commitment to the independent industrial umpire. Is the honourable members opposite suggesting that if members of parliament think that the decision in the minimum wage case, the next minimum wage case, is 50 cents out or 40 cents out, there should be an act of parliament to correct it? Are they going to suggest that? We give these issues. The honourable member says no. Well, that's the point. That is the fundamental point. Now, the Fair Work Commission considered carefully the impact on wages, and it considered carefully the impact on employment. and it heard evidence from many small business operators saying that a reduction in penalty rates on Sundays and public holidays would enable them to be open when they're not open now, employ staff when they can't currently employ them. And this is what the Fair Work Commission, how it described that evidence. This is a commission, every member of which appointed by the Labor Party, on a reference from the Leader of the Opposition, chaired by Mr Ross, a former official of the ACTU. This is how they described that evidence. They said, the evidence that is given by hospitality industry employers is cogent, relevant and persuasive. That was the Fair Work Commission's judgment after considering that evidence. And they went through one case after another of people running restaurants, running hotels, who said they would be open longer. They had Mr Trengove, owner and manager of the Mulga Hill Tavern, Broken Hill, 33 employees, said the hotel is run with skeleton staff on Sundays and public holidays.
Prime Minister will just resume his seat for a second. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on direct relevance, the Prime Minister is talking about the hospitality industry. The question is about the retail industry. The Prime Minister is talking about the Fair Work decision, and the question goes directly to why he won't act now.
I'd like to stay at the dispatch box, please. Look, the Leader of the House keeps interjecting. I'm trying to hear the point of order. Okay, it's really delaying question time. He needs to cease interjecting, particularly when I'm trying to hear a point of order that he expects me to rule on. And I say, as Leader of the House, if he's interjecting and I can't hear the point of order correctly, I might well just go with it. The Manager of Opposition Business will begin his point of order again.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. On direct relevance, the Prime Minister is talking about the hospitality industry. The question was about the retail industry. The Prime Minister is talking only about the Fair Work decision, and the question is about why he now won't act to intervene on it. On every level of this answer, it is not relevant to the issues asked in the question.
I thank the Manager of Opposition Business for his point of order. And as I said yesterday, the Prime Minister needs to be relevant to the question by remaining on the policy topic. Whilst I know that's frustrating, I'm not going to cover all that ground again and detain question time, other than to say the standing orders, of course, mean that the opposition gets to write the question, but they don't get to write the answer. And the Prime Minister is relevant, and I'm listening closely to his answer. The Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, the Commission is now turning its attention to how to transition these changes in penalty rates so as to achieve the objective that workers' take-home pay overall is not reduced. Now, they've canvassed. One of the ways they've canvassed doing that is by bringing the changes in over a number of years. Now, I heard today the Leader of the Opposition denounce that as a ridiculous suggestion. He said that was a ridiculous idea. When modern awards came into operation in 2010, when the Leader of the Opposition was the relevant minister, they were phased in over 5 years. It is a long-standing practice to ensure that the objective of modern awards, namely that changes do not result in a reduction in take-home pay, is achieved. The Leader of the Opposition cannot be consistent on this issue for a moment.
Has concluded. The member for North Sydney.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister outline to the House how Australia's strong export growth is supporting our economy and creating jobs for hard-working Australians? How does the government's economic plan help family budgets, and is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches to trade?
The Minister for Trade and Investment.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for North Sydney for his question. Like all members on this side of the House, we are very focused on implementing the government's strong, positive plan to keep growing export markets for our country. Because we on this side of the chamber fundamentally know that it is through driving exports, through opening up markets for Australian businesses, that we will continue to drive economic growth and continue to drive jobs for Australians. Indeed, Mr Speaker, we saw only yesterday in the national accounts that came out that exports contributed in a very major way to Australia's economic growth. In fact, the strength of our commodities exports contributed to just under half of the growth to the year to December. And our strong export performance delivered Australia its largest ever trade surplus of some $4.7 billion for the December quarter, and our lowest current account deficit since 2001. It's this export growth, it's the work that this coalition government has done in opening up global markets for Australian exporters that's part of the reason why we've enjoyed 26 years of continuous economic growth. And the benefits that flow from that are being felt across the Australian community. This coalition government remains focused on providing opportunities for Australian exporters, Mr Speaker, and the fact is it's not just confined to exports. Through our consistent approach, our commitment to free trade agreements, we're also seeing benefits also flow for Australians in terms of their cost of living. The fact is that our commitment to a liberalised trading environment, including through bilateral and multilateral agreements, has meant that the cost of major Australian household appliances, such as fridges and washing machines, has fallen by 14% over the last 20 years, which means a difference of roughly $75 on the family top loader that's retailing for around $500. The cost of audio and visual equipment has also fallen by up to 91%. This means that televisions, radios are significantly cheaper today than they were 20 years ago, a consequence of putting in place lower tariff barriers for those that are importing into Australia. So these are making a material difference to the budgets of Australians all around the country, helping them to pay their bills and to be able to make sure that they get to good quality products as well. The fact is, Mr Speaker, that it is through our commitment to open markets that we are making sure that we are making these items more affordable for all Australians. So, in other words, while we're rolling back prices, we're seeing a different approach from the Labor Party, though. We're rolling back prices, but the Labor Party, unfortunately, is rolling back policies. And the consequence of that is that we are seeing the Labor Party adopt a much more revisionist approach with respect to trade policy. They're actually crab-walking backwards away from a good, solid approach.
Just before I call the Leader of the Opposition, I couldn't have been more clear before about people who've been warned and people who interject regularly who've been warned. The member for Fenner has been warned. I've warned him a couple of times. He'll leave under 94A. The Leader of the Opposition.
Today, the Prime Minister. My questions to the Prime Minister. Today, the Prime Minister has heard from just some of the nearly 700,000 Australians who will have their pay cut because of the Prime Minister's support for the penalty rates decision. The Prime Minister has the power to stop these pay cuts, and he won't.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. The level of interjections on my right is now far too high. I'm going to ask the Leader of the Opposition to begin his question again, and if that continues, there'll be members joining the member for Fenner and others. The Leader of the Opposition will begin his question again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Today, the Prime Minister has heard from just some of the nearly 700,000 Australians who will have their pay cut because of the Prime Minister's support for the penalty rates decision. The Prime Minister has the power to stop this decision, and he won't stop the cuts. Why is this Prime Minister doing everything he can to give big business a tax cut, but doing absolutely nothing to stop workers getting a pay cut?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Nobody in this place has done more to give workers a cut in penalty rates than the Leader of the Opposition. He's a man with a record. He's a man with a record. The man with a record. What about the workers at Melbourne Olympic Park? What about them? They didn't get penalty rates. Oh yes, they got 25% extra to
the
work
Leader of the
between midnight
Opposition
and dawn.
knows the rule
Apart
on
from that, nothing.
Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And he claims that he talks about 700,000 workers being affected. Well, we've seen the reports today that that there's around 286,000. Well, Mr Speaker, that is a very substantial number. That's a very substantial number, but it's not 700,000. and it shows the way the honourable member is loose
Member for
with the
McMahon.
truth. But, Mr Speaker, we've heard this week about his great track record in trading away penalty rates for the workers that he represented. We've heard about how he traded away penalty rates for the workers at Clean Event, some of the lowest paid workers in Australia, and got a cash payment back to the AWU. He did that. He did that. But, Mr Speaker,
Member for
it
McMahon
gets
is warned.
worse than that. When in government, this leader of the opposition, against the advice of his department, so it's reported, issued 457 visas for fast food workers for McDonald's. Mr Speaker,
the Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition.
The following motion.
Yeah, no,
you can run, but you can't hide.
No,
let's bring it on.
No, the Leader of the Opposition. Leader of the Opposition needs to resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition needs to resume his seat. I'm sorry, I recognise the Leader of the Opposition because he can only jump in the middle of an answer on a point of order. He could certainly jump at the end of the question. The member for Grain, it might be his 21st birthday in this place, but I don't want him finished before the end of question time. I'm not going to allow that device to be used in the middle of an answer. The only reason I'm recognising members in the middle of an answer is on a point of order. So the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition again and again traded away penalty rates for the workers, the low-paid workers, under his union that he was meant to be representing. He had the power not to sell them out.
The Leader of the Opposition.
He had the power not to sell them out, but he did. And he stood up and said again and again he supported the independent umpire, and then he ran away from that. He doesn't have the courage to stick with one position for any period of time that commits him to being a man of integrity. He backs away from supporting an independent umpire, which has been a fundamental part of the Labor Party's approach to industrial relations for over a century. No integrity, no consistency, this hypocrisy from the Leader of the Opposition. And now, Mr Speaker, as he starts to try to revive the momentum of his blunderous outburst a moment ago, we'll see how he goes.
The Prime
with
Minister's
his
time has
leave
concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
I seek leave to move the following motion. That the House 1 notes, A, unless this parliament acts, the decision to cut the Sunday penalty rates of nearly 700,000 Australian workers will come into force as early as 1 July this year. B, on Monday, the Labor Party sought to introduce legislation to stop this pay cut. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister said he supported the decision to cut penalty rates. The Prime Minister has been willing to legislate when he objected to past decisions of Australian courts, tribunals and commissions, including legislating to overturn a Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal decision, legislating to preempt a Fair Work Commission decision about the Country Fire Authority, and introducing legislation to overturn a decision of the full bench of the federal court about native title. The Prime Minister has the power to stop these pay cuts for nearly 700,000 Australians, and under the Turnbull government, when companies receive record profits, they get a tax cut, and when wages flatline, workers get a pay cut. We call upon the government to legislate to prevent the pay cut from going ahead, and 3, agrees therefore to suspend so much of the standing orders as to prevent the Leader of the Opposition immediately introducing the Fair Work Amendment Protecting Take-Home Pay Bill 2017, the bill being given priority over all business for passage through all stages without interruption, and if consideration of the bill is not concluded by 3:30 p.m. today, any necessary questions to complete consideration of the bill being put without delay.
Is leave granted? Leave is not granted. The Leader of the Opposition.
I move that so much of standing and sessional orders be suspended as will prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion forthwith. That the House 1 notes, unless this Parliament acts, the decision to cut the Sunday penalty rates of nearly 700,000 Australian workers will come into force as early as 1 July this year. On Monday, the Labor Party sought to introduce legislation to stop this pay cut. On Tuesday, the Prime Minister said he supported the penalty rate cuts. The Prime Minister has been willing to legislate when he has objected to past decisions of Australian courts, tribunals and commissions, including legislating to overturn a Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal decision, legislating to preempt a Fair Work Commission decision about the Country Fire Authority, and introducing legislation to overturn a decision of the full bench of the Federal Court about native title. The Prime Minister has the power to stop these pay cuts, which will see nearly 700,000 Australians receive pay cuts, and under the Turnbull government, when companies receive record profits, they get a tax cut, and when wages flatline, workers get a pay cut. Further calls on the government to legislate to prevent the pay cuts from going ahead, and 3, agrees therefore to suspend so much of standing orders as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition immediately introducing the Fair Work Amendment protecting take-home pay bill 2017, the bill being given priority over all business for passage through all stages without interruption if the consideration of the bill has not concluded by 3:30 p.m. today, any necessary questions to complete consideration of the bill being put without delay. This is the most out-of-touch government in Australian history. You couldn't write the plot. A Conservative government, on one hand offering tax cuts for multinationals, but on the other hand pay cuts for low-paid workers. A government who will fight tooth and nail to give big banks a tax cut, but do absolutely nothing to stop a pay cut for hundreds of thousands of workers. The motto of the Turnbull government: tough on those who are doing it tough and soft on the big end of town. This pay cut is not about a spreadsheet. It's not about a set of figures on a desk or a table. It is not about simple economics. It is about the lives that people live. Today in question time there were several individual stories which were put to the Prime Minister. Stories of people who will be affected by this pay cut from the 1st of July. And what response did we get from this out-of-touch Prime Minister? It's not my business. It's not my decision. Not my problem. And of course what they do instead is just attack the Labor Party. Well, the problem that they've got here is that this pay cut couldn't have come at a worse time for Australians. I acknowledge that the big end of town is doing well under the Turnbull government. But what I don't accept is that when wages grow flatline, that somehow cutting wages is an economic recipe for including all Australians in our prosperity. It is incredibly interesting that yesterday in the national accounts, which the Treasurer is so proud of, in the national accounts, corporate profits shown to be the highest in 40 years. But what we see is that wages in this country have risen at the lowest level in 20 years. And yes, I do think that last fact is a shame. We see young people getting it in the neck again. This is a government at war with young people. They're not interested. They want to increase their HECS. They want to make it more expensive to go to TAFE with the loan system they've got. And what they also then want to do is make it impossible for them to buy their first home by their trenchant defence of negative gearing in the future. And now we've got a pay cut which will disproportionately fall on the young. No wonder young people are bemused at being called the Gilmore gift, because young people don't deserve the sort of attacks they're getting from this government. Then, of course, there's women. If we hear one more time from this Prime Minister that women hold up half the sky and then he's not prepared to see them get half the pay, it shows what a rank hypocrite this man is. And then you look at the regions. Already, I mean, my goodness me, what did the regions ever do to deserve Barnaby Joyce? And now they've got this pay cut too.
The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. I've made myself very clear on numerous occasions that members will be referred to by their correct titles. I've sat the Deputy Prime Minister down and refused to allow him to complete his answer. The Leader of the Opposition has latitude, but it only goes so far. He will refer to members by their correct titles. The Leader of the Opposition.
The Leader of the National Party.
Members on my right.
The hostages to one nation and couldn't learn how to fight with them. Now, what we've seen is some of these coalition members of parliament, they say it's a minor matter, it's a marginal matter. No, it's not a minor or marginal matter for most Australians. But what has been the defence that we've seen from the government? What has been the defence we've seen from this government? I have never seen so many startled wallabies in the headlights as this government when this decision came down. What their first defence has been is that through enterprise bargaining, unions have negotiated on behalf of members flexibilities in return for increases in pay. What this government willfully chooses to do is confuse a pure pay cut with the process of enterprise bargaining in this country. And then we had the ghost of previous banquets, Senator Abetz, make his contribution, the proposal of grandfathering. And I noticed that the Prime Minister was saying today, almost in a sort of parallel universe, he said, but the Commission says that
Veterans Affairs.
The Commission says that there'll be a transition, so no one will be worse off. No, Prime Minister, that is not correct. The decision means that on 1 July there will be a reduction in penalty rates. The Prime Minister is trying to pretend and say that there's nothing to see here. And then he gets on to his great friend, the independent umpire. This is a fellow who, when it suits him, trashed not only the decision of the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, he sacked the whole umpire. And last year we saw the farcical images of the Prime Minister donning some CFA gear, said, "I'm with you all the way," and then he came in and preempted a decision of the Fair Work Commission. So they're happy to do it when it suits their political cause. I asked the Prime Minister, though, what political cause could you possibly be championing when you choose not to do it on behalf of 700,000 Australians? There will be a reduction, and as for the Senator Abetz's proposition we can just grandfather everything, then anyone currently getting the penalty rates will be all right, and anyone in the future, any new workers, well, they'll have to take their chances. What a woefully mischievous idea. In industries like retail and hospitality, with a 50% turnover in the year, what chance do people on the old rates stand for employment when an employer can pay someone to do the same job as they're doing on the new rates? And what chance do the companies who choose to stick on the old rates have in competition when the system will allow new companies to compete with them and pay their people less? The grandfathering is not the solution. Labor's solution is the only solution to protecting the take-home pay of Australian workers. But what amazes me most about this whole debate is when the government says it's not our decision. And what they've been trying to do is say because it's the umpire, they therefore don't have to cast an opinion on the merit or the morality of the decision. When you become Prime Minister, your job is not to find somewhere to hide to avoid making a decision. People expect governments to intervene in the community when there are decisions made which are harming a lot of people. There is no government worth its salt in this country who could sit on their hands and do nothing to protect the conditions of 700,000 Australians. And then what we say is that this is not his government's decision, that it's someone else's decision. Well then, if it's not his government's decision, why was his government making submissions to these hearings? If it's not this government's decision, what will they do when the next hearing comes along? This government cannot hide in the middle of the traffic. They cannot sit on the fence. The Prime Minister said he supports the decision. What he needs to do is reverse his position and no longer support this position. It is an out-of-touch government backing in an out-of-touch proposition. The future of this country is not going to be found in a race to the bottom by cutting workers' conditions. The future of this country and productivity will not be found by reducing the pay of the lowest paid in this country. The future of this country will not be found in standing by and cutting the penalty rates of hard-working workers. There's no compensation for them. Labor will fight this issue in the House. We will fight it when we go out after this plays. and we will fight it all the way to the next election.
Of the opposition's time has concluded. Is the motion seconded? The member for Gorton.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Question is that the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Council assisting the Royal Commission into trade union corruption summed up the Clean Event enterprise agreement that the Leader of the Opposition in the AWU conducted very well when he said the benefits to Clean Event and the AWU are obvious. The persons who miss out are the workers. The person who missed out there were the workers. Again and again,
will leave under
the Leader of the
94A.
Opposition traded away the members of the AWU's penalty rates in return for deals with employers, whether it was the Melbourne and Olympic Parks Trust, whether it was Chiquita Mushrooms, more low-paid workers, whether it was Clean Event, whether it was Cirque du Soleil, Cut and Fill Pty Limited, right across the board, at one agreement after another, penalty rates were negotiated away by the Leader of the Opposition. He is as experienced in trading away penalty rates as he is in giving away 457 visas. An Olympic champion, a double gold medalist. Mr Speaker, the Fair Work Commission is almost at the point of declaring enemies of the people. We can see it's getting pretty close to that. But let's just go through them. President Ross, handpicked by the Leader of the Opposition when he was Workplace Relations Minister, formerly an Assistant Secretary of the ACTU. Vice President Catanzariti, also handpicked by the Leader of the Opposition when he was Workplace Relations Minister. Deputy President Asprey, promoted by the Leader of the Opposition when he was Workplace Relations Minister. Commissioner Hamp, appointed by Prime Minister Julia Gillard when she was Workplace Relations Minister, and Commissioner Lee, handpicked by Chris Evans when he was Workplace Relations Minister and a former Australian Services Union official. So this is a panel, every member of which was there because of a decision by a Labor government. They considered this matter about penalty rates on a reference by the Labor Party. And I quote the Leader of the Opposition when he said, as Minister, under the Fair Go workplace system Labor put in place, penalty rates in modern awards are set by the independent umpire, Fair Work Australia, after extensive consultations with employer representatives and unions. The Tribunal is currently holding a major check-up of the operation of penalty rates and public holidays and modern award rates. Employers, employees and their representatives are able to appear before the independent umpire and put their views forward. That's a fair system, he said, one that balances the rights of employers to make a profit with the rights of employees to fair treatment. And as to the suggestion that from the Greens that Parliament should intervene, he dismissed that. He said that would be playing with fire. He said he described the Greens as occupying a sideshow position. And he said, remember what the government has the power to put in, a future government has the power to dismantle. The independent umpire, the system of conciliation and arbitration has served this nation well for 120 years. Bill Shorten, doorstop interview, Geelong, 16th of May 2016. And 120 years of Labor Party history would have supported him, but now abandoned, thrown away in a desperate political populist move and of course promoting a monstrous falsehood of the kind for which he is famous. The suggestion that a decision of the Fair Work Commission is a decision of the government. So was it the government's decision to strike the minimum wage, $17.70? Will it be the government's decision to increase it this year? This is absurd. He knows, and Australians know, this is a decision of an independent expert tribunal. And, Mr Speaker, the Fair Work Commission carefully examined the case presented by unions and employers and their representatives. And it concluded, as I said earlier, that the evidence from the hospitality sector that a decrease in penalty rates would result in more jobs, more employment, more opportunities for young people to get some work on the weekend. They found that cogent and convincing and persuasive. And they found exactly the same finding in respect of the evidence on the retail sector. In fact, this is the words of the Fair Work Commission. This is the words of the shortly to become enemies of the people, according to the Labor Party, President Ross. This is what he said about the retail penalty rate awards. He said, while these provisions no doubt have some history, they're plainly inconsistent and appear to lack logic and merit. That was his judgment. That's the Fair Work Commission's judgment. They've come to that conclusion and they've proposed some changes. And in terms of ensuring that workers are not worse off in terms of their pay packet, they've set out the mechanism for doing that. And they've described how, when the modern awards came into effect in 2010, they were phased in over 5 years. They've suggested they could phase these in by a period of at least 2 years. So they've set out a roadmap to ensure that workers are not worse off in terms of their pay packet. Now, this is a carefully considered, lengthy examination doing exactly what the Leader of the Opposition asked them to do. We respect this independent institution. We respect this independent umpire. The Labor Party for 120 years used to, but now it does no longer. Now, Mr Speaker, the Labor Party not only is threatening the integrity of this industrial relations independent umpire, it threatens the jobs of every Australian. It has a set of policies, every single one of which is guaranteed to discourage investment and employment. They want to have higher taxes on business in a competitive world where the Governor of the Reserve Bank himself points out that we need to be competitive in terms of tax. The Labor is saying, no, time to soak business, get them to pay higher taxes. And what will happen then when businesses relocate overseas, when they take their business overseas, when they don't expand in Australia, when they don't move to Australia? That will be the consequence of Labor's populist approach to politics. And then, Mr Speaker, we see their approach to energy. Fundamental for every business is affordable and reliable energy. Exactly. Labor has shown us what they do in South Australia, a state which is struggling with manufacturing industries closing, desperately needing to reindustrialise. It has the least reliable, the most expensive electricity in Australia, courtesy of the Labor Party. Mr Speaker, we've seen also in their approach to trade, jumping on the protectionist bandwagon. We've seen record figures from agricultural exports in the last national accounts, as our exporters are taking advantage of those big export markets. We've opened them up, Labor would shut them down. We've been able to get greater access for all of our exporters, whether it's cattle, whether it's sugar, whether it's wool, whether it's wheat, right across the board. We've been able to do that, and Labor opposed those free trade agreements, and particularly and most disgracefully the China FTA. Exactly. Mr Speaker, as far as company tax is concerned, remember that it's not so long ago that the member for McMahon, who's no longer with us, wrote a book extolling the virtue of reducing company tax and said it was a Labor thing to do, citing Paul Keating. And then we had the Leader of the Opposition in this place saying that reducing business taxes increased productivity, increased investment, increased opportunity and increased jobs. And he was right then, but he's wrong now. Because what he's seeking to do, yet again, is turn Australians against each other, turn workers against business, divide the country, stifle investment, stifle employment, all in his campaign to do anything to secure an election to government on the basis of a populist anti-business campaign. He has no principle, no
The member for
consistency,
Lyons.
no integrity. It's a chronicle of hypocrisy posing as a political platform.
The member for Lyons is warned. The member for Gorton.
Thanks very much. Well, wakey, wakey, everybody. Mr. Speaker, this is an important suspension motion. That's why I second it, because this is a very important issue. This goes to whether, in fact, this parliament should support low-paid workers in this country. Now, the argument that's been posed by the Prime Minister, the only argument, is that a decision was made by the independent umpire. Well, let's be very clear here. In this place, this Prime Minister has actually contravened decisions of independent umpires on at least 3 occasions. Let's be very clear here. Within one sitting day of the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal Safe Rates Order coming into effect, the government introduced legislation with the intention to cancel the order and indeed legislated to abolish the tribunal. Within 7 sitting days of the resumption of Parliament, the government legislated to restrict paid firefighters' bargaining rights. And within 1 sitting day of the McGlade decision, the government rushed legislation through the House. Mr. Speaker, it is a fig leaf for the Prime Minister to hide behind the fact that the independent umpire made this decision. This decision will hurt Australians, and if this Prime Minister had any fairness and any strength in him, he'd defend those workers, he'd join Labor and defend those workers. But I ask myself, Mr. Speaker, why is it then, given the precedents he has set himself, why hasn't he then intervened and joined Labor to support this decision? Now, it may well be he wants to save face. Understand he's made the wrong call. You know, he feels embarrassed. He doesn't want to change his mind. You know, he's a very smart man. Just ask him. We know that. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, there might be another reason. There might be another reason, Mr. Speaker, because if you go to a paragraph in his contribution to the Work Choices debate, when he voted for Work Choices, he said the following, Mr. Speaker. He said the following, and I quote: "You have to let the free market do its work, and let the cost of setting the clearing price, be it for labour, shares, home units, or loaves of bread, be as low as possible. Be as low as possible." So this effectively what he said was let the market rip. That's what he means when he said that, Mr. Speaker. Well, the fact is that view, that laissez-faire view, that let the market rip view, may well be a popular view at merchant banker luncheons or on yachts in Sydney Harbour, but I can assure you of this, Mr. Speaker, the Australian public do not hold that view. The Australian public, Mr. Speaker, believe that, in fairness, the Australian public, Mr. Speaker, believe in fairness and decency, and they'd expect their Prime Minister to defend workers in this country, not hide behind a fig leaf to attack them.
The Minister for Urban Infrastructure.
Now, Mr. Speaker,
the Minister for Urban Infrastructure will cease interjecting.
The Leader of the Opposition, I will tell you what, I'll back this Leader of the Opposition any day to defend workers before this Prime Minister. The only time he seems to get excited is when he defends banks, when he intervenes to oppose the Royal Commission on banks. I mean, this man, in fact, the Prime Minister is the shop steward of banks, let's be honest. But look, Mr. Speaker, there's a more powerful way of putting this and a more serious way of putting this. And it's really an utterance by so many workers who've been referred to in question time today. And I just wanted to finish on one. Ruby lives in Newstead and works in retail, and she said the following, Mr. Speaker: unable to live on a paycheck to paycheck at the moment. I rarely save money. Losing that bit extra makes it a bit harder. People like me in my situation, we spend money on little luxuries that go back into the community, and it means I'll have less money to do that, pay the rent and other essentials. Well, some people might find that funny. I don't find that funny. I find it tragic that those members on the other side do not understand that this decision will have dire effects on hundreds of thousands of Australians, and yet this Prime Minister, who has the power to intervene and join Labor and defend these workers, refuses to do so. I don't find that funny at all, and I find it, quite frankly, an outrage. And I believe now the Prime Minister has an opportunity. For the last 4 days he's defended his decision not to join Labor, but I think he should rethink this. This decision, if implemented, will hurt a lot of people. It's up to the Prime Minister. He can either keep laughing at the anecdotes and the statements made by workers, or he can get behind these workers, look after them, join Labor and do that, Prime Minister.
The time allotted for this debate has expired. The question is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. All those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the noes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Still a minute, Joel. Lock the doors. The question is that the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Lawler and MacArthur tell us for the ayes, and the honourable members for Grey and Dawson tell us for the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 65, no 71. The question is therefore negatived.
Next question.
The Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice, please.
Thank the Prime Minister.